We all know what it's like to set a goal, whether it's to eat healthier, finish a big project, or finally start a new habit, only to find ourselves stuck, sidetracked, or losing steam halfway through. You're not alone. It's a universal human experience, not a personal failing. Today, we're going to investigate the science behind these challenges with Dr. Ayelet Fishbach, a world renowned expert in motivation and decision making. As a professor at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business and the best selling author of Get It Done, The Surprising Lessons from the Science of Motivation, Dr. Fishbach has spent her career uncovering why we set goals and sometimes abandon them and what it really takes to bridge that gap between intention and action. So, whether you're a leader, a learner, or just someone hoping to get unstuck, this episode is for you. So, let's jump in. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. You open your book with the story of the Baron trying to pull himself out of the mud by his own hair, and it's a vivid metaphor for self-motivation. Why do you think so many of us feel like we're in a rut and have that same struggle? And what's the first step to pull ourselves out?
As the story goes, this baron is pulling himself by his hair, which is quite impossible. Okay, it's like the idea of pulling yourself by the bootstraps, which is literally impossible. And I like to start there because we think about this and we say, well, this is not going to happen. Okay, I can't pull myself, but then we do. Okay, and what we do is basically designing the environment and the context and the plan by which we can achieve our goals. And so, no, you cannot pull yourself, and it's absolutely going to do nothing if you will get angry at yourself or criticize yourself or how much you are not where you are hoping to be. But there are many things that you can do. Okay? And this is what I study, this is what I write about.
And that's such a powerful distinction. But as you point out, even with the right goals, we can fall into some common traps that undermine our motivation. And you mentioned three of those in goal setting: focusing on the means, being too concrete, and framing goals as something to avoid. Can you walk us through these three traps and how listeners can avoid them?
Yes, the journey starts with setting a goal. Okay, we think about behavioral change or even just keep doing what we should do. We start by saying, this is my goal. This is my goal in terms of my family, my finance. This is my health goal. And we see that there are better ways to set goals. Okay, for example, we want to set goals that are not chores, that are not means. Okay, we want to identify the destination and start there. Okay, start with knowing where we are going, and so we find that people are not very excited when they think about the means. Okay, no one likes to pay for parking or shipping. Okay, we don't like to invest in means, quite literally invest our money. But when we think about the goal, okay, when we think about where we are getting, okay, or the gift that we are going to ship to someone, we are excited about that. When it gets to exercising, when we think about the person that we want to be, okay, this is exciting. When we frame in our mind exercising in terms of walking the steps or doing the low level activities, this is just less inspiring. So focus on the goal, less on the means. The goal is exciting, the means tend to be perceived like a chore. Another problem with setting goals, or no, let's be positive. Another trick with setting a goal is be more high level. Okay, you think about the forest. Okay, you think about what you're trying to achieve in your life, what is important for you. When we are too much in the trees, it is hard to get excited. It is hard to know the path. Okay? It's much easier to know how to get there when you step away, okay, and you look at the entire journey. So that was the second tip for goal setting. And then the third one was about approach versus avoidance goals, that is do something versus not do something. And as it turned out, it is much easier to get excited about doing something than not doing it, okay, than avoiding. Approaching a destination is exciting. Okay, the way there is often as exciting as actually getting there. Trying not to do something is very hard. Now, it is very hard because when you try not to do it, that brings to mind the thing that you are trying not to do. Okay, if I ask you not to think about something, you think about this exactly. Don't think about white bears. Okay, I did not come up with this. This is Dan Wagner in the 90s. Everybody now thinks about white bears. Okay, don't think about unhealthy food. Everybody's thinking about this. If instead I invite you to think about healthy food, okay, or think about your favorite animal, this is much easier to do. This is much more exciting. Then there is also reactance, but we can leave it for later. When we are trying to avoid something, there is the teenager that we never quite were able to get over, that says, oh, this is exactly the thing that I want to do because you told me that I cannot do that.
When I love these three traps because they're so common and I've fallen into them many times as well. That first trap, like you said, focusing on the means rather than the end. I find that a lot of leaders, they focus too much on the steps and lose sight of the why they're doing something. So the goal then becomes more tedious and less motivating. They also, which is somewhat counterintuitive because I see a lot of goals being very concrete, like lose 10 pounds or write 3 pages daily. But you mentioned in your book that may limit flexibility and it doesn't allow room for changes in life circumstances or shifting priorities, which then could detract you or cause you to fall off of that goal that you really want to do. So I love your insights here about these three traps, and really especially that third one about approach versus avoidance goals, which I haven't heard it framed that way before, but how you approach and frame these goals as moving towards something versus away from something can really not only affect your motivation, but also your emotional experience, correct?
Yes, and you made a very important connection to leadership, because we often find that leaders in particular, when they think about goals, they think about something very specific, something that you can measure. Now we'll get to it, and it's great if you can measure your progress toward the goals, but you want to start with something broader.
You share a story in the book of moving to a new city, working hard to pursue your education. Love to kind of you to unpack that story for our listeners and what you really learned about motivation from those early experiences that still shapes your work today.
Already when you're in college, and I'm sure your listeners can relate to this, there is this thing where no one quite tells you what to do. Okay, I mean, you are supposed to be in class, but actually no one really checks, and like you're supposed to do your homework, but they don't tell you exactly when. And then graduate school is on a whole different level, where you get up in the morning, it's like, what do I do today? Okay, I don't have a boss. No one tells me. They pay me to do research, but I don't know how and when and at what pace. And that meant that I really had to just figure out how to do this. Okay, how do you set goals? How you monitor your progress? Who is going to help me? Okay, so I was looking around me like, who are the people that are helpful here? How am I going to navigate everything? I also did something that is not quite common in the US these days, which is having two children while I was pursuing my PhD. So, how on earth do I navigate starting a family with my career goals, which I think when I talk about it on this level, then many people can relate to it. In my context, I was just like the only person with kids. It was very hard to do. And I'm a researcher, so what do I do when I don't know the answer? I collect data. I see how other people are doing it. I see what kind of strategies work well. And it felt like a very important question for me to ask, because I could immediately apply it to my life. Back then, I was mainly interested in how to overcome temptation. Okay, how do you get yourself to the task and away from the things that you should not do. And so we can get to this maybe later.
Well, and with choosing goals, I see another common strategy that a lot of leaders do is they fantasize. They imagine what their lives will look like once they achieve the goal. And people say that's a good thing to do because we envision how great it will feel to wear that graduation gown, to get that medal, possibly to get, to wear that wedding dress. But like you mentioned, fantasizing doesn't generate action. Fantasizing about graduating with honors won't necessarily make you study harder. And they're really ineffective as a motivational tool.
Yes, and here I should basically give credit to Gabrielle Ottingen, who is a psychologist at NYU, who is the pioneer research on fantasies. What her studies find is that when people fantasize, they don't do the work. Okay? They replace the dream with the action. Okay, when I envision great things happening at work, okay, in my organization, this is not necessarily something that is going to lead to action. And so, what works instead is thinking about the future. Okay, where do you want to be? Where do you want your company to be? And then, how do I get there? Okay, what is going to be the obstacle? How do I overcome these obstacles? Dreaming about life going perfect and everything just happening to me, that doesn't work. Envisioning the outcome and then making a plan to get there is a much better strategy. And Gabriel Ottingen looked at this in the context of finding a job and doing well at work, and also in the context of health and academic goals.
When you also mentioned the power of numbers and goals, and you have a story in the book that from Japan when they identified the 10,000 step pedometer and how that simple number helped to transform health habits in that country. Why do you think putting a specific number on a goal is so effective for motivation?
Let me first clarify that this 10,000 step a day rule has really no research that suggests that we need to walk 10,000 steps. It's a completely made up goal, which originated in Japan. And the story is that the first pedometer basically could only count to 10,000. And so they said, well, 10,000 should be the goal. And nevertheless, something that had no medical research behind it, that was kind of a fluke, okay, ended up being a goal for millions of people around the world because it is such a great goal. Okay? It is specific. There is a number there. If I fall below the number, I know I'm not there. I might walk around my bedroom at night to make it exactly to 10,000. If I do a little bit better than 10,000, well, I don't care. Okay? Now, what's going on here? Once we put a number on a goal, once we know how much or how soon, anything below it feels like a loss. Okay? And we don't like losses. Okay, we want to be able to check the goal. There is a very nice analysis of marathon running times in the US showing that there are more people finishing a marathon just under 4 hours than just above 4 hours. Now, why more people finish a marathon in 3 hours and 55 minutes than 4 hours and 5 minutes? Well, because once you say, I am going to do it in 4 hours, once you have a number, you want to meet this target. It is highly motivating. It becomes a goal in itself, and anything below it is a loss. So numbers are motivating. Put these numbers on your goals. But, if you don't quite meet the number, remember that it was only a motivational strategy. It wasn't really important to walk 10,000 steps or finishing the marathon under 4 hours.
And you mentioned numerical targets usually come in two forms, right? How much, save $10,000, or how soon I'm going to complete this within 1 year. And those targets pull you toward a goal and make it easier to monitor progress. They even tell you when to quit or slow down. Targets can motivate us because once they're set, we usually, like you mentioned, care deeply about meeting these exact numbers.
Yeah, so use numbers, invite your employees, your colleagues to put numbers on their goals. It makes it more fun. It makes it easy to see that we are moving. We all want to feel like we are moving. Okay, like I go to work and something happens. Okay, I exercise and I make progress. With numbers, it is much easier to see progress and get motivated by that.
Let's move into incentives because incentives are a critical part of goals. And you write that incentives matter, but they can also backfire. What makes a reward effective versus harmful when it comes to motivation?
Incentives are usually mini goals. Okay, not only you want to achieve the goal, you also want to get the incentive. Okay? If no, I do a good job, not only the project will amazing and my company will be thriving and I will get the promotion, I will also get this bonus. Okay, I will also get some immediate incentive. And so in general, incentives are important, okay, are critical part of goals, okay, in particular in context of leadership and employment. We see that incentives are often the rule of the game, but incentives can also backfire, and there are several ways in which this can happen. First, they might confuse us about the goal. Okay, so the goal might become the incentive, okay, getting the incentive. And so we might want to finish the project by the end of the day, but care less about the quality of the project, okay, the quality of the work. Okay, we might want to run a marathon under 4 hours, but put less emphasis on protecting our body from injury. Sometimes incentives so much confuse us so that we think that someone should be drinking because they are already 21-year-old. Okay, or someone should be driving over the speed limit because there is no police enforcement in this area. We, in a way, confuse the incentive, or in the police example, the punishment with the goal. It's still unhealthy to drink excessively, or to drive above the speed limit, even if the incentive is not there. Other ways incentives can backfire is by delivering the wrong message that the only reason you did something is for the incentives. Okay, and not realizing that this was important for you, that you added the incentive so that you can get excited.
When you mentioned too that when you're tempted to add an incentive to an existing goal, take a moment to ponder whether that incentive will serve you well. Is it going to pull you even further toward the goal, or is it going to obscure the purpose of your action and move you away from it? Sometimes just having that self reflection and that deliberate thought will help you to identify whether this is something that needs to be added or it's going to prevent you or make it more difficult to achieving that goal.
Absolutely. Is this the right incentive, and do you need it in the first place? Okay, is this necessary? We find that sometimes we are already excited about something and the incentives are absolutely unnecessary, and sometimes they just lead us in the wrong direction. They just lead us to pursue incentives rather than the goal itself. Now, saying that, incentives are necessary. Now, my book, I give the example of the Hanoi rats disaster. Okay, when French colonists were trying to get rid of the rats that were running the streets of Hanoi in Vietnam, and this is the beginning of the 20th century, they came up with a bounty system. They would pay a cent per dead rat. And because they didn't want to collect dead rats, they said that they're going to pay a cent per tail of a dead rat. Now, you do need to incentivize people to take care of the rats problem. Okay, it is a health hazard, and this is a problem to be solved. But not thinking through the incentives meant that they basically encouraged the people of Hanoi to breed rats, okay, and cut their tails and let them keep running around, because now you make money off rats. So no, be smart with your incentives. By the way, this is the Cobra effect, which got the name Cobra effect because of a similar plan to eliminate cobras in India, okay, by British colonists that failed for the same reason. If you pay for dead cobras, well, now people need to have live cobras so they can kill them and get the money.
And you also mentioned, which I think is also interesting, is when incentives are uncertain, like when they vary in magnitude or frequency, receiving a smaller than expected incentive or no incentive is less discouraging as when they are fixed. So uncertain incentives overall are more motivating, right? Because they're harder to get. So explain that concept and why that is the case.
Yes. Okay. So to get your intuition, think about salary versus bonus. Okay. Clearly, salaries is like for most of us more important than our bonus. That is for the majority of Americans. If at all we get bonuses, they are smaller compared with our salaries. However, we are much more excited about bonuses and we are willing to work much harder toward them. Okay? Basically, if something is unknown, okay, if I don't know whether I'm going to be successful, I'm interested, I'm curious, okay? I want to see what happens. I'm invested. Now, it's not that people like uncertainty. Okay? If you give a choice, okay, between certain and uncertain incentives, then most people would say, give me the certain thing. This is a better deal. However, when people work toward an uncertain incentive, they are willing to invest more effort. In a fun study that we ran, the leading author was Lucy Shen. She had people basically bid on either a bag that had chocolate truffles, okay, which they knew the number in advance. It had four chocolate truffles, or a mystery bag. It has either two or four. People were bidding more money to get the two or four. Okay, now what's going on here? Why would you pay more to get a bag that is a mystery bag that you don't know if it has two or four truffles? Well, it's exciting. Okay, I want to know whether I won. Okay, I want to see what happens. It gets my attention, it gets my motivation high, and people want to invest more. So uncertain incentives are good.
Let's shift to the emotional side of motivation. And a surprising counterintuitive statement that you make in the book is you write the best predictor of persistence isn't how important something is, but it's how excited someone is to do it. Why is excitement a better indicator than importance?
Let me first explain the finding before I explain why it happens. You can basically ask people to rate how important is a goal. Okay, how important it is for you to do well at your job, how important it is for you to exercise, and also how excited are you to do the work. Okay, how excited are you about your job? How excited are you about your exercise? And so you can basically measure extrinsic motivation, that is what are the delayed outcomes, how important it is in the long run, and intrinsic motivation, how much it feels good at the moment, okay, how much it is exciting. As it turned out, intrinsic motivation, that is the immediate feeling, is a much better predictor of persistence than extrinsic motivation. So we actually just published last month, so that was not in the book, a paper where we looked at New Year's resolutions and we followed through over a year. Okay, so we had like thousands of people setting resolutions, and then we are following through during several times during the year, and ask people whether they are still pursuing the resolution. Those that were excited about the resolutions, those that said that they will enjoy pursuing them, are pursuing the resolutions. Okay, those who said that the resolutions are very important for them, well, that barely predicted persistence. Now, why? Okay. Well, because the excitement and the emotion is immediate. Okay, and as humans, we are much more influenced by immediate outcomes. What will happen in the future has less influence than my experience right now. If you can make the goal exciting and pleasant, you will be doing it. If you make it more rewarding in 10 years or 20 years, not much of an effect because we are all very much present oriented.
Well, and that critical element that you mentioned, excitement fuels actions, right? We often know something is important. Like I know that exercising or saving money is important, but it doesn't necessarily excite me. So I tend to procrastinate. But when I'm excited, I feel more likely to start and keep going, even when things get tough, because that excitement really is, like you mentioned, the emotional engine of persistence. And the good news is it's something we can actually build by making the process more fun. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.